Hi everyone, my name is Amira and this lecture is all about the life of Erik Erikson, who we know as the developmental theorist who introduced stages throughout the lifespan and coined the term identity crisis. But he had interests in art and anthropology and had a wide scope of experiences that really made him who he was and led to his well-known career in psychology. So the goal for this lecture is for you to become familiar with Erikson's life and to be able to draw connections between his life and his work and maybe see some of those inspirations. So to do this, I will give you a brief overview of Erikson's childhood, young adulthood, and adult life and go over the evolution of his professional experiences and really just give you context to some of his ideas and theories that we are now well aware of. So let's jump right in and meet Erik. He was born in 1902 to a single mother, Carla Abrahamson, who fled Denmark to Germany because she had this child out of wedlock. Well, when Erik was a toddler, he became very ill, and his mother brought him to a pediatrician, Dr. Theodore Hamburger, who ultimately helped Erik get better and then married his mother. So Erik grew up as Erik Hamburger in Frankfurt, Germany. As a child, Erik had some struggles with fitting in. At his Jewish temple school, he was teased for being blonde-haired and blue-eyed and sort of stood out in that way, while at his grammar school, he was teased for his Jewish background. Now, he also wasn't a very successful scholar, but he did have a natural talent and inclination for art. However, his teachers did not really celebrate or encourage this skill. When Erik was a teenager, it was revealed to him that Dr. Hamburger was not his biological father, and this information sort of threw off Erik's whole worldview and sense of self. So already we see some of these early experiences maybe fueling his interest in identity formation later on in his life. After getting through high school, instead of going to medical school like his stepfather, Erik instead enrolled in art school, but quickly dropped out. For a few years after that, he would wander around Europe traveling with his friends, and to earn money, he would sketch portraits of children. Now, it was through that he was referred to a summer job one year, tutoring some American children who were living in Vienna. Now, the reason these children were living in Vienna was because their mother was studying psychoanalysis with Sigmund and Anna Freud. And so this is where we get the first sort of coincidental connection into the world of psychology. It was at this point in his life when Erik really starts finding his way. It turns out he had a knack for working with children, and Anna Freud noticed this ability to empathize and connect with children, and he was invited to stay on after that summer and help create a progressive school with some of her colleagues. So while he was there, he then earned certifications as a Montessori teacher and eventually earned a certificate in psychoanalysis from Anna and Sigmund Freud. Now, also importantly, this is where he meets Joan, his wife, who was a Canadian dancer and artist who was also working at the school. This partnership will become very important and sort of stabilizes him in his career because she is someone who will edit all his work and really um, collaborate right alongside of him for the rest of his life. In 1933, Erik and Joan and their family decide to move to the United States because of the impending threat of Nazis in Europe. On the boat ride over is when Erik learns some basic English as he's about to be immersed in yet another new culture. Now, this is when we start to see Erik's professional career really take off almost right when he hits the shore in Boston, Massachusetts. Because psychoanalysis is such a young field in the United States and Erik has this certificate of psychoanalysis and worked directly with Sigmund and Anna Freud, he immediately gets a faculty position at the Harvard Medical School. This is also when he officially changes his own name to Erik Erikson. A few years later, he'll spend time working at Yale University as well, and while in both universities, he's encouraged to get his PhD. He's only there with a high school diploma and some certificates. But Erikson is not really interested in the formal degree. He just wants to work with the children and work with understanding people. However, he does accept an invitation to travel to South Dakota to study the Sioux tribe. So let's take a look here.
But a more profound cross-cultural experience soon awaited him a summer with Native Americans at the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation of the Oglala branch of the Sioux in South Dakota.
But I met Scudder McKeel. You probably never heard of him. He died very young. Who was field representative of the Commission of Indian Affairs. And he simply said, "Why don't you come out to the Sioux Indians with me?" Because there the government is trying to send the Indian children to schools which are primarily staffed by non-Indians, in fact by Easterners. And the previous childhood of these children is not at all taken into account. And I think you could be helpful there. And there was a man in Germany, Karl May, who wrote books which we as boys read avidly. So the moment I knew this was the Sioux, as we called them, I couldn't stay away. For example, there was a handbook on the Sioux Indians put out by the government at that time, which was 300 pages long, and in that, half a page was devoted to childhood. And it was the easiest thing in the world to go out there and ask these grandmothers, now, before the white man came, how were your children brought up? They loved to talk about it. They always wondered why nobody asked them.
Using informants, Erikson went about filling that void and very soon saw that the world view of the traditional Sioux had very little to do with that of the government teachers. The children were being asked to live in two separate worlds with almost no help in bridging them. The Sioux upbringing was based on the expectation that males were to become buffalo hunters, nomads, following the now almost non-existent herds. The non-Sioux school teachers were training children to replicate themselves, geographically stable, salary-earning, competitive individuals. Unable to merge these models, the children became apathetic. These complex and rich observations left Erikson with a significant problem. He realized that the model he had taken from the Freuds left something terribly missing. It was at this point that the giant step was taken by Erikson. He realized that the biological and the psychological were so interwoven within a social context that this simultaneous unfolding of a life goes on from the beginning of life to the end of life.
So with this profound insight and inspiration from his time spent in South Dakota, Erikson moves to the Bay Area, California, and gets a faculty position at UC Berkeley. And it's during his time there that he writes the book Childhood and Society, in which he introduces his psychosocial theory of development. And this book and this theory have a huge impact in academia in many fields and even catches on with popular audiences. And it's this book that really rises him to the fame and renown and respect, and the reason why we are talking about him even today. So beyond this, Erikson continues his work with research and lectures, writing essays and books. He even travels to India where he studies Gandhi and writes a book that wins a Pulitzer Prize award. He goes back to Harvard and continues teaching, and throughout his life he continues working with Joan, where they even revise and expand on his theories throughout his whole life. Eventually, he passes away in 1994 in Massachusetts. So So, to conclude, I hope this lecture gave you some insight into the life of Erik Erikson and showed how some of his early struggles with identity and his cross cultural experiences really influenced his work. Thank you so much for listening.